instead of heading to Saul and beyond, to leisure. 2 days later, Jemima met Henchay by the Saul Illogan marker stone. She had gone over and over what she was going to say, that the man, William Smith, had surveyed hundreds of sites and had compelling evidence of strata lines and, applying it to leisure, meant that the copper ore could not stretch towards Trevigi, but would carry on towards Grace. Had Grace yielded copper before? She would ask that if those before her, if do, did they know what direction? Jemima knew the answers to these questions, but by putting them to the shareholders, she was more likely to engage them, to win them to her side. Not like she had any side in any case. Yes, she wanted her theory to be true, but they, the people before her, were the ones who would benefit financially. All of the shareholders will be there, excepting Captain Poldark, of course, Henchay told her, and they walked on, in relaxed silence, until they got to Bodmin. And they talked of the other mines, and how they may link with layers of ore, and it reminded Jemima of a pudding that Mrs. Giddy once made from pastry and fruit, put into a glass dish, with layers. It was so very much like William Smith's theory, and she had written to him about it, saying she was attempting to show his theory in the rock in Cornwall. As they got to the outskirts of Bodmin, with marketeers beginning to set up, and people bringing catches to the square, a man called to Henchay, "Mr. Duncan, go low." Henchay greeted him, and turned to Jemima. "Miss Withering, meet Richard Duncan, a Wheel Leisure shareholder," he told her. "Miss Withering is to address our meeting, and will give us something to think on." Unfortunately, that's where the joviality finished, because Duncan gave Jemima a sour look. "We are acquainted, are we not, Miss Withering?" It took Jemima a minute to think, and then she knew. She had been with Humphrey to the man's house when she was younger, done experiments in his garret room. He was Humphrey Davy's guardian, who had rejected him when Humphrey had gone to work with Dr. Beddoes in Bristol. Jemima searched for a positive thing to say, but ended up making it worse. "My friend, Humphrey, was your ward. Have you heard of him of late?" And for a moment, Jemima thought he was going to strike her. "He was my ward." "But your father turned him from mining." The man glowered at her, as if it was actually Jemima's fault. "I trust there is no ill feeling to me," Jemima went on. "Humphrey has been a friend to me for a long time. It is because we know the engineers and industrialists and doctors where I once lived. Gregory Watt is now in Bristol teaching Humphrey." Duncan shifted his weight between his feet. "I wish him well, of course. But you did not want Humphrey to go to Bristol to be a doctor." "I did not want Humphrey to go to Bristol. I wanted him to stay and remain a surgeon here, in Cornwall, in the district." He took a step towards Jemima. "But, I suppose that would have stood in the way of your papa's earnings." "What a disingenuous thing to say!" Jemima exclaimed. "I thought you a nice man, Mr. Duncan. You taught Humphrey so many things. He showed me your ice experiment, and, incomers, that's what you are, both of you. Bloody, wretched incomers." The man glowered at Jemima and she shivered, taking a step closer to Henchay. "Mr. Duncan, I ask you to moderate your language," William Henchay told him. "Miss Withering is to address our meeting with an idea that, whatever it is, I will not approve it," he told Henchay, scowling at Jemima again. "Even with evidence? Even if it will make you money?" Tonkin stopped, but stared at her. Then he said, "Good day to you, Captain Henchay, Miss Withering," and strode away towards the Red Lion Inn. Jemima watched him go, and then looked across to Henchay. Did Henchay knew he loved her then? He often thought back to that time, standing in the street near the inn after Duncan had berated her. She was in his mind after they had crossed to France, to liberate her brother. With her brother. Because he, Henchay, had worked something out, and knew for certain that Jemima Withering was no incomer. He had met her before. No, he had seen Joshua Poldark's wife great with child, shortly before Wheel Leisure closed for the first time. What's more, before he left with Ross to liberate Anais, and Robert Withering, Prudy, Ross's servant, confirmed it. It had been the word incomer that had angered her. Jemima Withering knew she was native to Cornwall, and all that happened thereafter, with George Walgan, with Richard Trevithick, with the death of her father, with him, all that was to come. But the spark had happened there, On the day of the Wheel Leisure shareholders meeting, at the time, all he had said was, "Don't give up hope, it is a good plan." "I haven't," Jemima told him, still shaken from the man's ferocity. "It makes me all the more determined to explain how Wheel Leisure could make money for all its investors." 88,888,888. And they were arranged there, around a table at one end of the Red Lion, those she recognized and those she didn't. Orchid, who she had met at her father's house once, nodded to her, as did Dr. Choke. Tonkin glowered at her, and beside him sat a thin, gaunt-faced man who was introduced as Thomas Tankard and told her he represented George Walgan. "How, why?" asked Zaki Martin, who Demelza Poldark had chosen to represent her husband's interest. "Because another shareholder was in need of capital and chose to sell their shares." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Withering. Captain Henshay here has told us you wish to share something that may affect where we choose to mine." From just beyond the room, in a little alcove, Dr. Withering leaned forward, to better hear his daughter's words. Beside him, Reverend Giddy, and across from him, Wilde. William Wilde smiled as Jemima spoke. "I wish to speak to you all, because I have been made aware of some information, due to be published, that I believe will make a difference to where our labors are set. You will see on your tables, a map, I took the liberty of drawing up too, so you may all see. On the left, this is the current plan, each of the levels are marked and a key made. I copied it directly from the map used at Wheel Leisure." She looked up, and was heartened to see that they were all looking over one of the maps. "On the right, a sketch of where I have calculated copper to be, using the theory of stratification that William Smith proposes. If you see," she added, noting how the men were looking at the map, "I have added in where the most recent copper has been mined." She leaned over and pointed to the lode she had first discovered behind the Blackstone. "And here, where it has been discovered now." "Here," Jemima pointed to where the ironstone had first been cleared, "is where copper was once prospected, but little if any found." So far, so good. Even Duncan was looking, even though he still looked resentful. Miss Broken-Bar Withering?" John Orchid looked up to her. "Mr. Orchid?" Jemima waited for the question. She had spent an hour that morning at Henshay's house practicing the answers to potential questions. "You say, child, that you heard about this from a man of Broken-Bar, William Smith. He is a surveyor, sir, for mines, for canals. I had the good fortune of meeting him when I resided at Mr. Wedgwood's home, earlier this year." "He is a colleague of Jamie Brindley, the canner?" Orchid asked. "Yes," Jemima agreed. "Mr. Smith has worked in many areas of the country, and has devised a theory based on what he has seen, about how rock is laid down. It is called stratification." "And you believe stratification can be applied to Wheel Leisure's rock, do you?" The question came from Tankard. He was looking at the paper, and then looked back to Jemima, his eyes fixed on her face. "If it applies to all rock, it stands to reason it also applies to Wheel Leisure's rock," Jemima told him. "And what is it, this stratification?" Orchid asked. "Well," Jemima began, "if you look at the left-hand map, you can see the seams. They are laid in horizontal layers. Smith has shown, and has written for publication, that these strata can be predicted, and if they can be predicted, those who do so can benefit from this knowledge. So can you. I have suggested and still suggest, that the copper strata heads a little off horizontal, based on what came before, and heads south." "South?" asked Duncan. "Towards Captain Poldark's other mine, Will Grace. Not towards the Trevaggy mine." She turned to look to Henshay, who nodded to her. "I have no interest in leisure besides being employed in her. But you, gentlemen, all rise or fall by her prosperity, all lack of it. It is your decision. While your major shareholder is currently detained and is being represented, and here she nodded to Captain Zaki, you have the choice as to where the men work. They, too, prosper when the mine prospers." "Ha!" exclaimed Mr. Renfrew. "What do we know of this William Smith?" A murmur circulated, and Jemima felt her cheeks glow. What did they know? She had copied the report, and given it to Henshay. Perhaps if she had reproduced it for them all to read. But, it seemed, Henshay had already beaten her to it. It was the report I circulated last month, he told them. If we apply it to leisure, then Miss Withering's assertions stand. A man beside her, Horace Streneglos, turned to Jemima and examined her face. Then he asked, "A slip of a girl, knowing about a mine?" "I learned about mining as I grew up, as my father, who you know, sir, gave me the greatest gift, that is the freedom to talk to me who he knew, and was associated. I learned about coal and iron, and then copper and tin here in Cornwall. All that I owe to my father, Dr. Withering." At this, John Withering turned to Giddy, and smiled. His friend returned the smile, and William Wilde clapped him on the shoulder. "Gamely put," he told Withering. "Do you not wonder we want her at the ding-dongs?" John Withering was about to say something, but then waved a hand as the speech began again. This time it was Henshay who was speaking. Beside them, silently, a figure entered the Red Lion. He placed a coin on the bar, and nodded to the barkeeper. "Gentlemen," Henshay began, but then broke off as he spotted George Walgan in the doorway. "Do please continue," he told Henshay, and nodded to Tankard, whose place he took. "Would you summarize, Captain Henshay?" The smile slowly crept over his face as if being revealed by a tide. Jemima looked across to William Henshay. "The question as to which direction wheel leisure mining should continue is being discussed," he told Walgan, gravely. "Miss Withering has, using evidence from an independent surveyor, proposed where copper may be found. She believes." The interruption came from Richard Duncan, who was on his feet now. Clearly his silent brooding had reached its limit. Yet Jemima turned to her friend's former guardian and looked back to him. "I understand your concerns, I truly do. If my father were here, he would not wish me to tell you that he lost money and became altogether poorer for a mining investment. Our lives were changed by it, and not for the better. Had that area been fortunate enough to have been surveyed by William Smith, then all the investors in Blue Joan, including Wedgwood, including Dr. Darwin, would have been able to have made a more informed decision." She turned and looked at all of the men, all of them with money deeply committed, all of them affected if the mine did not prosper. "I do not offer you this advice out of recklessness," Jemima continued, "and certainly not for personal gain, but to show you that I likely have information that could yield you profit. If you look at the map yourselves, where the copper was found last Christmas, it is in direct line with where the black stone is that heads south, in a straight line." She turned and looked at Henshay, who nodded as murmurings continued around the table. "Do sit, Miss Withering." It was George Walgan who spoke. "Euhavia Broken Bar detailed the situation extremely well. I for one would endorse this, I would not." It was Richard Duncan speaking now, and he got to his feet, standing opposite George Walgan. "This information, unchecked information, is at complete odds to the previous conjecture. Why has she," and he stabbed a finger at Jemima, "been allowed to speak here? An ignorant woman, who has brought a theory here, which has never been checked, to us, and we are expected to believe her." "Mr. Duncan," began Henshay, but Duncan had not finished yet. "Her father and she are incomers, and she has been allowed to work in a Cornish mine as some sort of hobby, some sort of folly. That rule of the, Mr. Duncan, first order. Will you sit down, sir? Who knows coal and ironstone, or so she says, that is enough." And her wretched father, who she now confesses to being ignorant of business and, Mr. Duncan, have you been drinking? It was George Walgan's words that silenced him. But he glowered over at Jemima. In the main bar, Edward Giddy gripped John Withering's arm to stop him from rising. "Trust her," he told his friend. "Trust them. No one could doubt her." "I don't," chuckled Wilde. "I'd have her over at Boskednan this moment, Dr. Withering, this moment." "Young Dick, I never knew him so voluble." "It is true, this is unchecked," Jemima told them all. "But so is any estimate. You do not have to trust anything that I have said. Not in any way. But I have come because I care about this mine. Captain Poldark gave me a chance, and with it, My work yielded copper ore. I have costened along where I think the strata are, and they have yielded positive results. She looked at Richard Duncan. It is because you taught Humphrey so well that I can be confident. It is because it has he assayed them. They all contain copper. She paused, and from her pocket produced 3 rocks, all of them blackstone gossans, all of them with characteristic malachite blooms. Then damn it all, I will vote for Horace Trineglos declared, narrowing his eyes and smiling at Jemima. If the gel has gone to all this trouble, and she has sought expertise up country, and she has done tests on the load line, I say yes, he told the room. As do I, Orchid echoed. We are to vote? Asked Renfrew. Aye. Yes. Came the room. All except Richard Duncan, who sat, sullenly, in his chair. Capital indeed, George Walgan exclaimed. A plan which has a lot more going for it than blind faith and 30-years-old plans. He raised his glass to Jemima, who nodded her head. A vote then, Henshaw concluded, as Jemima looked across to the man. He believed in her, it didn't matter to her about any others. He raised his hand. Walgan raised his too, as did Trineglos. Orchid followed shortly afterwards and, after a brief pause, so did Renfrew. Is there any damn point me being here? Tonkin complained. Then raised his own hand. Jemima's heart soared. Even the man who had disparaged her and her work from the moment he had seen her that morning had voted for her plan. She smiled, and Henshaw smiled too, laughing gently at the outcome. Zaki, he prompted, turning to the mine captain. You represent Captain Poldark, who is the principal shareholder. What say you to this plan? Zaki shifted from the fireplace, and to Jemima, it seemed as if he had appeared out of it, so still and silent he had been throughout the whole of the discourse. I can only say yes, Zaki Martin agreed. I have seen what it is Miss Withering has done, and I do believe that to be copper beyond the Blackstone. He raised his hand. In that case, William Henshaw declared, glancing around at the Wheel Leisure shareholders, it is for me to say that, with immediate effect, we will be mining along the Blackstone Ridge. No, no, you will not be. The door had slammed open, and a figure filled the frame. Ross Poldark stood still, and then stepped towards Jemima, as if no one else was there. You would do this? Arrange a shareholder meeting behind my back. He waved his riding crop towards Jemima's face. She flinched, and scrambled to her feet, but did not take her eyes off him. Captain Poldark, chastened Henshaw, your decorum, sir. But Ross Poldark stepped past his friend and business partner and waved the crop before Jemima again. I am released from prison, and the first thing that happens is that you press these people into believing your harebrained schemes about copper to wheel grace. He turned and placed both fists on the table. You don't believe it, Captain Ross? Asked Trineglos. Believe it? He looked over his shoulder and glared at Jemima. She may know coal but she does not know copper and tin. Ross, you are not doing yourself any favors. It was George Walgan who spoke, and Poldark turned his glare to his enemy. We heard the whole of the information. Perhaps Henshaw can elaborate on all the facts, and I know every fact. Zaki Martin availed me of them all. And that you support her, George, should be enough of a reason to refuse support. George Walgan got to his feet. He surveyed the other investors before fixing his own glare back onto Poldark. You do not seem to see reason. We have had evidence, such evidence, that only a fool could deny. This is a money-making venture, is it not? And Miss Withering has no personal vested interest. What possible reason could you have for not following up on it? It was, after all, you who have her the job in the first place. And I was sorely wrong to do so. She knows coal mining, ironstone mining. She is not one of us, she is an incomer. Far from shouting, Poldark was now standing upright, tall, and filled the room. As majority shareholder, I refute all evidence presented and will not support this change in operation. From the bar, Giddy made to grip Dr. Withering's arm again, but was too late. John Withering was on his feet, and making towards the meeting. He was just about to push past Zaki Martin and confront Poldark, when he heard his daughter's voice. Truly, Captain Poldark, it is good to see you. Jemima began. The mind can only benefit with you to guide it again. But, I stand by my words, using Smith's stratification theory, and the samples I took, and that they are in line with the first copper I found. The copper lode heads south, to your other mine. No, Miss Withering, you are wrong. It's all in your own head, copper in line, like coal seams. You are back in your own country there. You are an incomer to Cornwall who knows nothing of the land. He turned his head to Richard Duncan and nodded, then glowered at Jemima. I agree with Mr. Duncan. Incomers are not welcome. It took a second for Jemima to compose her words. When she did so, she said them loud and clear so none could mistake them. Captain Poldark, whatever you may say, whatever you may believe, you can believe that nothing I say is true even with the evidence I am presenting, as is your right. But one thing you cannot say, is that I am an incomer. I was born in Cornwall, to Cornish parents. Captain, I am as Cornish as you. Jemima began to move towards Ross Poldark now, her own words clear, her voice steady. So if the majority shareholder has no faith in proposal, Jemima turned to the rest of the men, using all the effort she had not to look at Henchay, or else she knew she would be lost. Then, Captain Poldark, I quit. Quit? And Jemima found herself smiling faintly. Quit? Jemima reiterated, collecting up the test samples and pushing them into his unresisting hand. Sir Francis Bassett has sought my expertise for the Ding-Tong mines, and I need to get as quickly as I can to Cambourne in order to tell Mr. Wilder news that I am free to be engaged as their new engineer. Good day, Captain. I thank you for the opportunity you afforded me. It is only a pity I never did call on your wife as she asked me to. She turned, and looked at the other shareholders, wishing it could be otherwise. Good day to you all, gentlemen. As Jemima found out mere minutes later, she needn't go all the way to Boskednan to find Wild. A new chapter in her life was beginning, and it did not involve Wheel Leisure or Ross Poldark. 88,888,888. Her father was home when Francis Poldark came to Meadowsweet Cottage. It was a Sunday morning, just over a week after she had given in her notice, effective immediately, to begin work at Wheel Fortune. He was shown into Dr. Withering's study and John Withering asked Mrs. Vaughan to call for Jemima. I wish to give my unreserved apologises for the trespass I made on your person, Francis Poldark told Jemima. It was unacceptable in every possible way. He looked across to John Withering. My cousin's loss is most definitely Lord Bassett's gain. I would a broken bar be happy to listen to your theory. It's not my theory, Jemima told him, after accepting his apology. What else could she have done? Jemima told herself later, it's not like he can unattack me. The credit is to William Smith, for it is he who told me of it. But no one thought to apply it to a Cornish mine. Miss Withering, he encouraged. If I would speak to my cousin, would you go back to Wheel Leisure? His expression was so earnest, so dogged, that Jemima almost felt herself agreeing. But then she caught herself, and regrouped. I cannot, Mr. Poldark, if he will not listen. He called me a broken bar, some names that I will not repeat before my father as I left the Red Lion that day. And, as Mr. Wilde has repeatedly sought my skills, tell me, what would you do, Mr. Poldark? Francis Poldark gave a brief smile. I would do as you say. But, I would add one thing, my cousin he is a good man, and has been through trying circumstances. And if you would only, I have only, Jemima told him. I have listened, put aside his choice of words and dismissing of my knowledge, which I bring only to benefit Wheel Leisure, not in any way for my own gain. And at every turn he has refused to listen, even when I have been proved right and the mine yielded copper where I believed it would. Jemima moved to stand beside her father. So no, Mr. Poldark, I am sorry, I will not return to Wheel Leisure while Captain Poldark treats me so. I do thank you for coming to explain, and to plead for sense on behalf of your cousin. I am sorry it cannot be different. The broken bar. I will not take up any more of your time. Good day, Miss Withering, Dr. Withering. Good day, Mr. Poldark, John Withering replied, and nodded. Jemima nodded too. Good day, sir. I am grateful for your apology, and truly sorry my time at Wheel Leisure had to come to an end. Mrs. Vaughan showed him out, and within minutes, hooves could be heard on the path outside the cottage. When Francis Poldark had left, John Withering turned to look at his daughter. "I am so very proud of you, Jemima. The proudest I could ever be. You spoke eloquently and with logic at the meeting, and today you put yourself across clearly. My daughter, if there is nothing more I can teach you, I will be the proudest father there could ever be." And Jemima rushed to his arms. "I could not have done it without you, father," she told him. "If I am as I am, it is because you taught me, you provided me with opportunities which few other women have. We have our friends, we have a good life." She stepped back, and made to go, but her father held up his hand. "This came, this morning, in a letter from Josiah Wedgwood. Read it." And so Jemima did. The pertinent information was a letter from a Mr. Herbert Sidebotham, Edel, telling John Withering that, "Can it be true?" she asked, and read the letter again. "It is true that I am much richer than yesterday. Oh, daughter, though we are far away from our people, Wedgwood and Darwin fought to have the mine reopened, and they struck Blue Joan, which Matthew Bolton has bought for his manufactory. And now, he has sought to send the letter, and the promissory note, which I may take to any bank I choose." Jemima watched her father sink into relaxed contentment, a state which she could not remember seeing him in at all since they had come to Cornwall. "We are most truly blessed. What it is like to have friends."